Good morning. I'm genuinely trying to work out what exactly Sadiq Khan is being rewarded for.
Knife crime.
Right, yeah, and the brilliant state of our once magnificent capital city that literally everybody you talk to about says they are now increasingly worried about the state of quite flagrant crime on the streets, how dirty it's become. You talk to people from abroad who've come here or haven't been to London for a few years and have come recently, and they're shocked by the state of our streets. So I just don't know. If you want to discredit the honours system, if you want to actively go out of your way to raise questions about the way the honours system is used, how about giving Sadiq Khan a knighthood?
And it's not just about knife crime or feeling less safe on the streets. I'm also very mindful of the traffic, for example, the introduction of ULEZ against many people's wishes. That's why we saw other political parties doing well in certain outer boroughs of London. We've also seen traffic crawling to a halt, the introduction of the 20-mile-an-hour zones, the decimation of nightlife. I actually think that's one of the biggest tragedies of London, is that we aren't seeing the pubs, the bars, the restaurants staying open late and having those alcohol licences. In fact, he has presided over the death of nightlife in London.
It's such a shocking, tragic, wasted opportunity, because London is still one of the greatest capital cities on the planet. It has so much potential, and every time I'm tempted to talk it down, I look around me and I see the fundamentals. No other capital city has the spectacular Houses of Parliament on the Thames, has all that history. There are so many bits to London. If you're a tourist, most cities are quite hard to sustain as a tourist for, you can really not fill in more than 2 or 3 days maximum. I reckon London, you could be in London as a tourist for 10 days and still not be bored. And yet we let ourselves down, or rather, he lets us down. For example, the Houses of Parliament aren't fully lit up at night. So many other iconic buildings are not actually shown off at their best. And there is so much more that we could do. And instead, he pours money into silly woke initiatives and endless posters around Vauxhall talking about pride and diversity and so on, and it just isn't showing off our city at its best.
Just in terms of his knighthood, how much of this is Starmer watching his back, do you think? Because I think Khan's got his eye on the top job. He'll be opening his little book of contacts, wondering who would support him.
Well, if Sadiq Khan wanted to go for the top job, I know that every other opposition party would be delighted, because a less inspirational, politically threatening figure is hard to imagine. If Labour wants to swap one utterly mediocre performer for one that's on the same level, then, go right ahead, knock yourselves out, install Sadiq Khan. So I don't know, really. Is Sadiq Khan much competition? Maybe changing demographics mean that he might be competition for Starmer, but I would say that opposition parties would say, bring that on.
I mean, I think one thing that Sadiq Khan has is he's an incredibly divisive politician. He panders to certain minority groups where he knows he gets the bloc vote, and I think some of the things that he said are frankly downright dangerous and outrageous. Let's have a look at and remind ourselves about him and what he said about those people who were anti-ULEZ, those protesters. He said they were far right. Have a look.
What I find unacceptable, though, is some of those who've got legitimate objections joining hands with some of those outside who are part of a far-right group. Let's be frank. Let's call a spade a spade. Some of those outside are part of the far right. Some are COVID deniers. Some are vaccine deniers. And some are Tories.
I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable, Isabel.
Every time politicians are stupid enough to smear large swathes of ordinary, law-abiding, decent people with these sorts of labels, I think good luck to you. You might have got away with this for some years, but things are changing. And if politicians like him go on using this lazy characterization of anybody who disagrees with them, anyone who actually dares question their crazed agenda, calling them far right, well, there are going to be repercussions for that politically, and we're already seeing it in the huge shifts in support for political parties right across. You know, the hegemony of the two traditional parties is falling away, and it's because leaders like that continue to insult ordinary people.
Let's talk about also changing political situations. This is an article in The Telegraph about Blair opening the borders. This is about 2004 and the accession of 8 Eastern European countries into the European Union. And it transpires that Tony Blair was being advised. Very significant advisors were saying, look, you need to have a transition zone on this. You can't have unfettered access to the United Kingdom from countries like the Czech Republic and Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Slovakia and Slovenia. David Blunkett was the one that says, actually, you need to open the borders to allow them in. We need to rely on cheap labour. They got the figures woefully wrong. They said 13,000 people would come here. They were wrong. They were enormously wrong by tenfold, more than tenfold. It went up to 200,000.
And yet, when you cite those figures, 200,000 people who actually, vast majority of whom at that time did come here to work and build new lives, and actually did so quite successfully and integrated quite nicely, those figures absolutely pale into insignificance now, don't they, relative to the complete uncontrolled influx that we've had in recent years. I mean, it's certainly true that when you look at the history, the disastrous history of mass immigration in the UK, this is where it all began. But that would have been recoverable. You know, I think many people could come up with plenty of positives about Eastern European immigration during that period. What has been an absolute disaster is the mass importing of people with low to no skills who are net dependents on the state, not net contributors.
And just finally, if I may, just talk about sickness and mental health sickness, or those people taking time off because they have a mental health problem. So there is another story this morning. Public sector workers are 3 times more likely to take mental health sick days than those in the private sector. I'd love to see how many self-employed people take days off for mental health issues.
Well, wouldn't that be interesting? I don't think that there'd be any great revelation that it'll be a vanishingly small number, because if you've got to get out of bed to earn a living, if if you're having an off day and you're feeling a bit blue and not going to work means you're not actually going to get paid that day, then it slightly alters the calculus. I think that 2025 has got to be the year that the authorities, the DWP and those in positions of power, grip this so-called mental health crisis. It is way out of control. The figures are off the charts. Of course, we always have to say this, it's boring to do it, but yes, of course, some people genuinely are very, very unwell in their mind, and it might be addiction or it might be genuine clinical depression, which is a horrible, horrible condition. But I'm afraid that there are mass numbers of people who are swinging the lead, and they are being enabled to do so by an unquestioning state, public sector employers, and an unquestioning welfare state. And we can't go on like this. You know, the broader issue of the abuse of disability benefits, which are much needed for a minority of truly unwell people who, ironically, often have to jump through far more hoops than they ought to. You know, people who've got cancer, people who are physically heavily disabled should not be made to go to hell and back to get our support. But far too many people are frankly taking the mickey, and this has got to be confronted.
Isabel, always good to talk to you. Happy New Year. Are you all sorted for later?
The entire household has been stricken by various allergies, so it's going to be a quiet one.
Oh, I'm really sorry. I hope you feel better soon, or I hope the household feels better soon.